You're listening to Radio Azad, and this is your host, Ayesha. I had promised you a segment on AI, and I have just the right person with me to do this segment. His name is Zia Yusuf, and I have known him for as long as my memory serves me. He's someone I look up to literally and figuratively, and someone who I am incredibly proud of, not only for the groundbreaking work that he's done throughout his life, but because he follows his heart and he follows his passion. A true trailblazer in every sense of the word. And for the very, very first time, we are the same height. Okay, on screen. Hello, Zia. How are you?
Hey, good morning. That was an awesome introduction. I should invite you to every one of my talks and have you introduce me.
Well, thank you for being here. First time on the radio. I know you are a busy, busy person, but just so thrilled to bits to have you here on the show with me. So, let me first tell the listeners a little bit about you, formally introduce you. Zia is currently a senior advisor with Boston Consulting Group, and before that, he was a VMware senior vice president of strategic ecosystem and industry solutions. He was CEO of a leading startup called Streetline and executive vice president of SAP, amongst other very prominent positions in the tech, education, venture capitalist, and startup industries. His resume and list of accolades is so long. I had to concisely bring it to you, but really, I meant every word. They are very, very proud of you.
Thank you so much. Super excited to be on. Wow, this is amazing. After many, many years, I would not have imagined in my wildest dreams to be on a radio station with you. That's awesome.
All right, Zia. So let's get into our topic. And I know we are going to have an informative segment, but a very fun segment as well. So, until a few years ago, the average person had never heard of AI. So, very briefly, what is AI and why are we hearing more about it now?
Sure. Look, I think maybe a little bit of technical history, if you will, right? AI, artificial intelligence, has actually been around for many years in different shapes and forms.
Hmm.
Um, the early ways of describing it, you could talk about it in terms of machine learning, where a piece of software looks at something over and over again and detects a pattern, and then based on that pattern tells you what is happening and what can be done. If you look at your Netflix account where there's a recommendation of a movie based on other movies you've watched, that's AI. It's looking at a pattern of the things that you've watched and is making recommendations.
So, these
Uh,
algorithms that we keep seeing, that's all AI generated?
yes, I mean an algorithm is a formula that says, again, it's looking at patterns. It's doing pattern matching, right? You go
Hmm.
on Twitter, you go do shopping, you're clicking on different things, it's
Hmm.
looking at that history, it's making suggestions. All of that is AI,
Okay.
right? um, and most software that was written for applications, you can also look at self-driving cars, right? I mean, the ability of an autonomous vehicle to detect a stop sign and know that that's the stop sign, even if the shape of the stop sign changes, to
Hmm.
know that there's a crosswalk, there's a traffic light, yellow means slow down, etc. That's all AI.
Hmm.
What changed a year and a half ago when ChatGPT came out in November of that year was what they call generative AI or Gen AI.
Hmm.
This is fundamentally different than AI. It builds on that technology, but Gen AI, as the word Gen suggests, is actually generating something new that
Hmm.
has never existed before. And it's basing it on essentially all of human knowledge. So these what are called large language models, which is what OpenAI has, which Google has in something called Gemini, which Meta has. Um, these are models that are sucking in data from all of the internet, every book on the Library of Congress, everything that's ever been published, everything that's out there. And based on that knowledge, when you ask it a question, and
Mhm.
you can do silly things like ask it to write a poem, ask it to write a book, and we'll get into all of that.
Mhm.
It's generating something new that has never existed before. And it's
Mm.
putting that power in the hands of every single person on earth. So it's absolutely an evolution. There is this distinction between AI and generative AI.
Mhm.
And because it's impacting how we live and work and play, it kind of caught everybody's attention.
That's a scary thing what you just told me, because like we have, Generation X, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, and now you're saying there's Gen AI. Is that a scary trend or what?
It's scary. Personally, I don't think it's scary, right? I think the implications of it are fairly profound.
Mm.
You had the internet revolution. I mean, you had the industrial
Yeah.
revolution.
Mhm.
You had the internet revolution. You had mobile. I mean, when the internet
Mhm.
came out, it was like, oh my god, now you can do search, and you see how that's evolved.
Mhm.
You see things. I mean, the fact that we're doing this podcast, we're doing it live.
Yeah.
15 years ago, you'd have a telephone, and you had this like horrible noise, like, and people still remember that dial-up thing, right? So
Mhm.
things have evolved. I think because this talks about knowledge,
Mhm.
because this is generating new information, it is a profound new capability that I think will have implications in every aspect of life.
Mhm.
And the restructuring of industries and how you think differently about your day-to-day job, there will be changes. In most cases, I think it will be quite a positive change. But like any massive technology revolution, there will be changes.
Okay. So you touched upon it a little bit, but what are the different types of AI that are out there?
So when you say different types, yeah, I think it's to look at the different use cases. Right? There's a
Mhm.
whole technology industry of creating the infrastructure of AI, and I mean, people talk about Nvidia, people talk about Microsoft. So there's the technology side of creating the capability.
Okay.
A much more interesting piece is what do you do with this capability?
Mm.
And I think you can divide it up into a couple of different categories if you want, right? So one
Mhm.
is enterprises or businesses.
Mhm.
So whether it's your airline, your car company, Procter and Gamble, whatever it is.
Mhm.
Maybe two or three kind of quick examples, right? So you look at call centers. First, you used to call your airline. You'd talk to a human being. You'd get into a queue. Then 3-4 years ago it started moving into kind of an Alexa type situation. You have reached the call center, press one. Okay, what question do you have? It was a very awkward kind of
Very.
discussion, and everybody including me would keep pressing zero, yeah, 0 0 0 0 to somehow get out of
Yeah.
that
Speak to a live agent.
Exactly. So now that is moving towards a much more sophisticated engagement with a Gen AI powered chatbot, if you will, right? So the voice is much more conversational. You can ask questions, you can have a conversation.
Mhm.
Uh, I stayed at a Marriott recently, and for the first time, it had this kind of conversation when you dial zero to try and speak to kind of room service or something.
Mhm.
That technology and call centers and how companies look at call centers is fundamentally going to change. Now that impacts people that are in call centers in
Mhm.
India, Thailand, and Turkey, and so on
Yeah.
and so forth.
Mhm.
But there's also a downside to that example. There was a recent example, I think it was Air Canada, where somebody logged onto a website, and there was a
Yeah.
chatbot. And I think Air Canada had this bereavement policy where if unfortunately somebody passed away,
Mhm.
you could get a discount and do that. It was on their website. But this
Mhm.
person had to fly, I think, the same day. And so asked the question on the chatbot, hey, this has happened. Can I fly? The policy said you had to get approval for this discount before you fly.
Mhm.
But the GenAI chatbot, looking at this conversation in a very kind of normal, almost human way, said, sorry for your loss. This is very bad. No, please fly. It's okay. We'll take care of it.
Mhm.
So this gentleman flew, came back, submitted his thing, and the airline said, no,
Yeah.
we're not going to honor this because the website said something different. But he
Mm-hmm.
said, your chatbot told me it's okay. And they said, no, the chatbot is not representing Air Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And this went
What?
to court,
Mm-hmm.
and Air Canada lost
Yeah.
because they said this is what you need to do, right? So it's
Yeah,
there's
you
gonna-
created that chat bot which gave out that information. So they have to be held responsible for it.
yeah, and it's very interesting because the chatbot looked at the policy on the website because it's drawing data from that.
Mm.
But then, given the circumstances, made, I don't want to say a human decision, but a enlightened decision
Hmm.
that this was the right thing to do,
Yeah.
even though the exact policy said something different. So I think that's a great example. Another example in enterprises for marketing.
Hmm.
You hire a marketing agency to create videos, and
Mm.
you a 15-second ad either online or something else. You can use something like Sora, which is from OpenAI. You can
Hmm.
literally type in a prompt, and if people, your audience, have never used Sora, go look at Sora online on YouTube.
Hmm.
And with a few sentences, you can create a 15-30 second video, and you can say the Jeep Wrangler is going through the Sahara Desert, the sun is rising, etc., etc. You hit enter, and you get something. So it may take you half a day to do the prompts, but it's
Mm.
not taking you millions of dollars.
Wow.
So there is a whole series of processes, of use cases in enterprises that are being honestly radically transformed.
Hmm.
You look at the healthcare sector.
Yeah.
You look at the role of a radiologist. You
Hmm.
know, a radiologist gets trained. They look at thousands of images of a heart. They look at shadows. They're able to very quickly see, hey, there's a little shadow here. There's something wrong. You now load up millions of images of a heart into a GenAI kind of platform, an AI platform.
Hmm.
They'll be able to detect those anomalies honestly far better than a trained radiologist.
Hmm.
So the radiology profession is going to dramatically change. Same thing for pathologists. But
Yeah.
then you look at drug discovery, you look at how AI is changing dramatically the information around gene sequencing and so on.
Hmm.
So many of these kind of Aisha, enterprise examples, right,
Hmm.
of what changing. Then from a personal perspective, right, as individuals, um, if you're a artist and you use something, you've heard of Mid Journey or you've heard of DALI, which are these creation things. If you're a writer, the creation of content.
Hmm.
I moderated a panel last week and on AI, and it was around the impact of AI on the creative arts, right? And I uploaded a few of the paragraphs of the writer that was on, and I asked ChatGPT to create and write me 5 new chapters of a new book, but
Wow.
using her style.
Mm.
It took me a long time. It was almost 20 seconds. I didn't know what to do with my time. And it came up with 5 chapters. It came up with a story. I asked you to create a cover, and I
Hmm.
could have kept going. I could have said expand on each chapter, change this character to this character.
Hmm.
And then I did kind of the same experiment with the artist, who's a very accomplished South Asian artist here in the Bay Area. And I uploaded one of her paintings, and I asked DALI to kind of recreate this, but change the rose from red to a slightly blue color.
Hmm.
That was a much shorter thing. It took about 3 or 4 seconds.
Hmm.
And then I put up both paintings at the panel, and asked the audience which one is real, which one is that. You can't tell, right? Half the people raised it, and so on. So as you look at creativity,
Hmm.
the technology is moving so quickly. I think it's going to be a very interesting question on what is the human role in
Yeah.
creativity. Does it go away? Some people will say this is bad, this is horrible, how can this be? You're having machines. Other people will say, you enhance what you're doing and you can do it better.
Hmm.
Education is obviously being turned upside down, where students can write a paper in minutes as opposed to hours.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to unpack, and there's
Lot.
ethical issues, there's
Mhm.
privacy
Absolutely.
issues, there's all kinds of stuff.
We definitely talk about that. I think we're at a cusp right here. Like you talked about the Industrial Revolution and how, that changed the world. The phones came, they became an extension of our body parts almost. I think we're at another cusp of humanity right now where we have this incredible technology, and it is going to change the world, and we'll talk a little bit about that. You mentioned Dali, you mentioned Sora.
Mid-journey, mid-journey.
Okay, help me understand what these are. Is there like one agency who is creating all these, or it's different people who are creating these AI tools? Help me understand this.
Yeah. So I think if you look at the technology stack of AI, to put it simply, right, without being technical terms, there's the computing infrastructure. And I mentioned this because things like NVIDIA, which has increased in price, and NVIDIA provides these chips
Mm-hmm.
that are needed to process the massive amount of data, right? This is why NVIDIA is doing so well. You need very fast processing in order to process this. So there's the hardware data center infrastructure,
Mm-hmm.
which people cannot create fast enough. Then there's these large language models, which are very expensive to build, and there's only a handful of companies can afford to spend billions of dollars to train a large language model. Google is doing it, Meta is doing it, OpenAI together with Microsoft is doing it. There's a company called Anthropic that's doing it. So let's say there's a handful of these companies
Mm-hmm.
that are taking all this information in the world, as much as they can find. And by the way, there's all kinds of privacy and trademark issues there, because the New York Times has sued them because they're using New York Times articles over decades to feed into this data. So it will be very interesting on how that happens.
Mm-hmm.
So there's these large language models, right? Think of it as collecting all of human knowledge into one electronic place,
Mm-hmm.
which is different than a Google search, right? It's not linking.
Okay.
The third layer on top of that are the applications. What do you do with this information,
Mm.
right? So ChatGPT is one tiny application that you and I can use to access the large language model. So it's a portal into the large language model where we can ask it questions, we can ask it to create things, we can, et cetera, et cetera. There are many other applications. So Dali is a text to visual application that sits on top of that. So
Mm-hmm.
if you ask Dali to create an image of a Mughal scene, but somebody playing cricket in Texas, and you put in those exact words,
Uh-huh.
it will draw on all the Mughal paintings that it's had. It
Mm-hmm.
will draw on every single image of cricket it's ever seen, which could be in the millions, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
and it will draw on millions of images of Dallas. Based on all of that, it will come up with a unique image in seconds that somehow merges Mughal art with Dallas and cricket, right?
Wow.
And so, in that sense, at the application, at this third layer, you can have all kinds of different applications
Mm-hmm.
that draw on those kind of large language models.
I
A
think
little technical, but I think it's important to just get that layer in.
yes. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because for a layperson like me, it is, it's hard to comprehend that where is all this coming from. You mentioned customer service, right? So, what are some of the what do we see in terms of how AI, generative AI, can affect customer service? And also, I want you to talk a little bit from a business point of view about lead generation as well.
Yeah. So on customer service, customer success. So when there's a human being that's doing it, right? I think you always look at the job to be done,
Mm-hmm.
right? What is the job that somebody does? So a customer service agent today, you call them or you email them. You say, I have this problem. By the way, take a simple kind of day to day. There's something wrong with my dishwasher, or there's something wrong with my TV or whatever, and you call Samsung or anything else.
Mm-hmm.
They try and ask you questions. what is wrong, did you try this, did you try this. um, these are not technical people, so then they have a script in front of them.
Yeah.
If you say, hey, the power isn't coming on, okay, can you please try this, can you, they have a very structured thing because they're not
Mm-hmm.
there.
Mm-hmm.
They're relying on the data and information of 50 other calls, 10,000 other calls. They have this, people have created customer success kind of applications.
Mm-hmm.
All this is about data, right? It's data, data, data. The more data you feed into a model, the
Mm-hmm.
more effective it becomes.
Mm-hmm.
And here's an important distinction. The large language models, Aisha, takes all of the public human knowledge,
Okay.
but companies have their own private information, right, which are not part of this.
Okay.
So United has all the information about your flights, about what's happening, what tickets you've bought, what seat you like, what food you like, etc., etc. That's not something that a large language model can pick up from the internet. But
Mm.
United had this information.
Okay.
So when a United kind of AI agent talks to you,
Mm-hmm.
they're getting both the United proprietary information
Mm-hmm.
as well as all the public thing, and that comes together and allows them to do that. And so the ability, I mean, imagine every single piece of data in United for the last 50, whatever, how many years United has been around, loaded up into this model, and you can ask it any question
Mm.
and it'll give you an instant answer. So it dramatically changes it, right? On sales, actually, my wife Priti works for a company called, this is not a plug, but it's called XIQ. That is a AI based agent to help you on lead generation and to assist on sales. And there's many other companies that do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So how do you do that, right?
Yeah.
Like, who do you want to connect to? What is their role? What is the best way to position it? Can you create an email that is tailored to them? So you can go look at all the public social media posts, Aisha, that you've done.
Mm-hmm.
This AI model will generate an email in a form, in a tone that you will respond to, right? As opposed to a form email that, Aisha, we
Mm.
would like to
Yeah.
have this conversation. Like, Aisha, we've heard your
Personalized.
radio program. It's very interesting. Last week you did this, and it creates a profile of you
Mm.
in minutes from all this information and creates very, very targeted, rich kind of information.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's changing marketing, it's changing sales, it's changing HR, it's your recruiting platforms. Now you have Gen AI based interviews. People are doing interviews with
Really?
chatbots that look like people. So
Wow.
the first round interviews, there are companies that do this now, right? Your first round interview will be with a avatar
Mm.
that looks like a human being, that has your resume, that has information on every single post you've ever done,
Mm-hmm.
and will have a conversation with you that will be recorded, will ask you questions. But you can have a conversation. You can say, well, I don't think I did this. Well, you didn't do this, but you said this when you posted something 7 years ago where you said that you were an expert in this. A human being would not get all of that. But
Mm.
a Gen AI recruitment avatar would have that information.
But aren't we taking that human element, that vibe out of it, right? There's so much that can be said for a face-to-face interview, let's say, even over a Zoom interview with a live person. You get a sense of what that person is all about. How can technology gather that?
Yeah. So it's an awesome question. And I think it's one of the most fundamental question,
Mm-hmm.
which is, what does it mean to be human
Mm-hmm.
in a Gen AI world, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I'll give you one answer to your question is the technology that you're seeing today is the worst you'll ever see,
Worst.
because every day it's improving, right? So whatever you think
Mm-hmm.
you know today,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, you will be able, this conversation that we're having,
Mm.
even today,
Yeah.
I could replicate with avatars that look like you, sound like you, look like me, sound like me, could have this exact conversation. And we talked about this notebook LLM that came
Mhm.
from Google that does this, and you can add human-like things. So this conversation, even today, can be replicated. Will people be able to tell a little bit different? Potentially.
Mhm.
6 months from now, maybe not.
Oh.
The interview AI models also look at your features. They look at your eyes. They are actually sensing in a
Mhm.
much more sophisticated way. Are you lying? Are you not lying? Are you happy? Are you not happy? Right?
Mhm.
So it will become better and better. Now, the human piece of it, it's what value you add as
Mhm.
a human being is going to change.
Mm.
So if you look at the writer,
Mhm.
maybe a writer creates the basic storyline, creates the 8 or 10 characters, then uses ChatGPT to do a first draft and then publishes it. Maybe they write a book in 1 week instead of 3 years. Now, do you say that person is cheating? They didn't do this properly versus somebody who spent 3 years, writing it away.
Right.
That
Mm.
I don't know how users will respond, right, to this.
Mm.
Great example. A couple of weeks ago, there was a painting that was sold for $1.1 million. It was a painting of Alan Turing, who's one of the founders of technology and computers. It was painted by a AI robot.
Mhm.
So it was a robot with mechanical arms that actually painted on a canvas,
Okay.
but it was all fed by AI. And that painting sold for more than $1 million. So
Oh.
somebody valued it
Mm.
and was willing to paint for it and make that payment.
Mhm.
I think this will depend on all of us, right? You may get to the point where, like, you go to the grocery store and you find something that's organic, it has an organic seal, and you believe it's organic, and so you pay, at Whole Foods, you pay 20% more for that organic thing.
Mhm.
Maybe a year from now, there'll be an AI generated book, and there'll be a book next to it that has a, authentic written by author thing.
Mm.
Are you going to pay as much for that or less for that than the AI generated one? Are you going to care? I don't know. Maybe there's a third book that says this is 50% AI generated and 50% authentic.
Mm.
Is that going to say, oh, no, that's okay? And is it 50% or is it 90-10, right? 90% Gen AI, 10% the author.
Right. So the question is, are we actually going to continue to care for that human element in an AI world? It's a very very important question, and I don't think there's a right answer to that. So in all this public data that's available, w- how accurate is it? The answers that AI is giving us, how do we know that they are 100% accurate?
Yeah, there's that's also a very important question, right? And there's a couple of different angles to this. One is there's a technical term called hallucination. I don't know where that term came from, but LLMs do hallucinate in
Hmm.
the sense of they can come up with an answer that's not entirely correct.
Wait,
Now
what is
that,
LLM?
sorry,
What is LLM?
large language models, right? So that middle layer that I talked about, which is
Okay.
where all this information is coming from, right?
Mm.
Now, as they get fed more data, as the users use it more, it gets better and better. So, for example, there's a movement towards, would you trust your family physician
Mhm.
in discussion to be completely AI enabled, right? Today, you have visits with your doctor online. Can you get to the point, especially in countries in Africa and Asia where you don't have access to a live doctor, would you trust an AI generated engagement? You upload your test results, you have a conversation. Maybe it's not to the point where you would trust it 100%, but we're getting there, right? Today, if you upload your test results into ChatGPT, it will give you an incredible analysis of what could be wrong, what the next steps are, and so on.
Mm.
But there's also biases built in, and
Yeah.
and this is a big issue. So if you asked ChatGPT to come up with an image of a CEO, this was a famous case that happened. The image would come up of a white male as a CEO. Now,
Mhm.
that because ChatGPT, using all of human knowledge, went back and saw that 90% of the time a CEO's image is of a white male, and so when you ask the image of a CEO, it came up with a white male.
Mhm.
So there are actually human beings that work for these companies that are going in and making tweaks to the model so that those kinds of things don't happen. So has been an issue on recruitment in using GenAI to do that,
Mhm.
because again, you're using data, you're using historical data. So historical data says that a certain profile of a person will do well in this job. But if you're African American, if you don't have a traditional computer science degree or something else, but you could be an amazing candidate for a role, a human being may see that in you and see the potential. The Gen AI interview model may say this doesn't fit the profile.
Mm.
And so there are absolutely kind of issues there that we have to watch out for, right?
Okay. Okay. So obviously, what you've told us, I mean, Gen AI is absolutely amazing at analyzing historical data. Is it going to be able to predict the future?
Um, First of all, you should try it. So, by the way, one advice to all of your listeners is whether it's Chat GPT or something else, try and incorporate it into your day to day life,
Mm.
because that's the only, and it's very easy to do. That's the only way you'll kind of learn how to do that. So, predicting the future, I mean, when you and I or somebody else predicts the future, as a
Mm.
human being predicts the future, they look at their experiences, they look at data, they crunch the data, they think this will happen, so we think this will happen, right?
Yeah. Modeling. Mm.
It's smart, right? And with your own little special spicy sauce. So now what does a GenAI model do? It's doing exactly the same thing,
Mm.
but with a far more sophisticated way to connect the dots than you will ever be able to do.
Mhm.
So you can go in and ask these questions. What do you think will happen? It can give you a perspective, but it'll also tell you that many different things can change.
Mhm.
So can you use it to better predict the future because you can better understand the data? Sure. Is it going to be right every time? No.
Mm. Interesting. All right. Um, can you tell us a little bit? We just had the recent elections in the United States, right? So, how was Gen AI used to impact the elections?
Uh, like every technology, negative ways and positive ways, right?
Hmm.
The negative ways are, and this is the combination of AI and social media, is the spread of disinformation
Mhm.
is so rapid and so compelling that it's very difficult to tell what's true and not true. And by the way, this has happened in elections outside the US as well, where WhatsApp groups, WhatsApp thing starts, somebody puts out a message, people believe it's true, it gets shifted to many different discussions, and suddenly, like, hundreds of millions of people get this message, and by that time, it's true. Creating fake videos, or what they call deep fake videos, has become so easy that you would just not know, right? You
Mm.
just would not be able to tell.
Mm.
And I think in that situation, again, whether it's Fox News or New York Times or Washington Post, you're going to get to the situation where you're going to go to trusted sources. But as we saw in this election, those trusted sources have moved from traditional media to other types of media. So people are trusting what they see on Twitter. They're trusting what they hear on podcasts, whether it's real or not. So that's the negative side of it, right? The positive side of it is the information that you and I would have as informed citizens. Should we go out and try to seek that information, we'd be much more informed
Mhm.
about it. We can look up stuff. We can look up voting records. We can look up what people have done. rather than get just a list of search items. So it's a complicated. It's going to get super complicated.
Mm.
And again, whether you're at home, whether you're in a job, whether you're driving, whether you're cooking, whether you're a construction worker, I mean, there is no aspect of human endeavor that's not going to be impacted by this technology.
So better
In
get on
most
the ground.
cases positive, in some cases it's going to be super disruptive.
Yeah.
And I think the way to think about it is not whether a job is going to go or not. It's whether what is the job that you're actually doing in the day. Like, what do you do at 9 a.m., what do you do at 1 p.m., what do you do in the evening?
Hmm.
And you look at all of those things, and maybe what you do at 9 a.m. you can do in 20 minutes instead of 5 hours.
Yeah.
Then you take those extra 4.5 hours and you do something else with it, right?
Hmm.
That doesn't mean your job goes away, but that means your job changes,
Changes.
and
What a
gets
great point.
enhanced, right?
Yeah.
So it's about enhancing
Yeah.
human potential.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we were getting some calls. So give us 2 minutes and then we can open the phone lines at 972-501-9390. I'm in conversation with Zia Yusuf and we are talking about the Gen AI tsunami that is upon us, whether we like it or not. Zia, how do you see AI evolving in the next 5 years? And are there any exciting fronts that you are looking at with great interest?
Yeah, I think again it depends on what interest you have. I think there's stuff on medicine,
Mm-hmm.
the healthcare sector in general, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, the ability of companies to create new drugs faster, the ability of changing the access to healthcare by having patients interact in a much simpler, in a much more comprehensive way, I
Mm-hmm.
think is going to be interesting. Education, Khan Academy was one kind of way to do it. Now there's an increasing profound change on how you teach and how you learn as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's going to be an interesting sector to watch. Um, I'm always interested in the intersection between the digital and the physical world. So if you look at autonomous cars, right? I mean, if for those of you in San Francisco or Phoenix, etc., I mean, the Waymo cars, if you get a chance, go into this, you can order it like an Uber.
Mm-hmm.
It is a little bit of a mind, I don't know if you've done that, it's a little bit of a mind-blowing experience,
Yeah.
a little bit of a scary
I've seen
experience
them
as well.
in Austin. Yeah.
Yeah. And I had a discussion with somebody the other day. It would be really fun to have the side windows be kind of a augmented reality screen, whereas you're driving through a city, it can give you a tour and it can show the buildings and show information. So there's so much you can do, right?
Mm.
So robotics and that intersection of the physical and digital world is going to be super cool.
Interesting. How much regulation is there right now, and how much regulation do you think there needs to be?
These are, Aisha, very simple questions to answer. Things like privacy, things like IP regulation is. So there's different. If you look at it from a geopolitical perspective, by the way, it's an interesting
Mhm.
thing, right? There's three centers of AI.
Mhm.
There's the US, there's China, there's Europe. There's kind of an increasing momentum around AI in the Middle East, in UAE, and in Saudi Arabia.
Mm.
Um, in Europe, they've been much more conservative. I mean, the privacy laws in Europe are much more advanced. Something called GDPR. Um, China, the laws are are completely supporting this. So there is a very much of a race towards creating this content, and in many ways, the competition of the future between countries will rely on their ability to harness GenAI. And
Mhm.
which is why in the US, for example, it's become a national security thing, right?
Mm.
Where the US is restricting the sale of NVIDIA chips and AMD chips and Broadcom chips to countries, especially to China and others, because they don't want that underlying technology to go there. The regulation, it's a super complicated question because what do you regulate? Right? I
Mm.
mean, what is the to regulate something? You need an objective. Is when you regulate cars, you don't want them to crash. You want the seatbelt to be safe. You have regulations where you have a very specific objective.
Mhm.
Here, what is the objective? Like, what are you trying to control? Is it that you shouldn't use private information?
Yeah.
Okay,
Or that deep fake, videos that go
right.
out,
So
right?
one is writing the law. The other is actually then how do you enforce it? So
Mm.
how do you enforce somebody sitting anywhere in the world creating a deep fake?
Mm.
Right? The technology is out there. It's not like you can go to three companies and say switch off this technology. Right? The technology is out in open
Yeah.
source and so on.
Yeah.
Um, so I think it's going to be, and regulation always kind of lags the technology. So what regulators are looking at today is based on what they saw last year and the year before, and this stuff is moving at the speed of light, right?
Mm.
So I think one regulation is it's a national security thing. Don't sell your underlying computing technology to countries that you don't want it to happen. So you can restrict that. So that's kind of emerging, if you will. There's going to be another very interesting thing around privacy and this New York Times lawsuit that they filed and other entities, where the New York Times articles and all that content, who does it belong to? Well, you could say it belongs to the New York Times, but you and I can go write a LinkedIn post and reference a New York Times article. New York Times doesn't care.
Mm.
It's under this fair use policy. But when you take all of this and put it into a large language model, and then you sell it to somebody else that they can create information, is it still a fair use model or not? Right. So there's going to
Mm.
be, through lawsuits,
Mhm.
there will be some information where somebody like an OpenAI and ChatGPT has to pay the New York Times. Today, they're not. So there may be something around privacy. There may be something around leveraging other people's content,
Mm.
like images, right? I mean, when I gave you the example of the Mughal cricket in Dallas, there's Mughal paintings out there that somebody owns.
Mhm.
This model is not recreating that image, but it's leveraging that image to create
Mhm.
a new image. So
Yeah.
now, should you have to pay for that and so on? We're still very much in the early days of that.
Yeah, still the treading on
Yes.
water, so to speak. So, yeah, this has been very, very enlightening. Where does somebody go to get like a list of all the things that you mentioned, all the the Dali and the Sora and so many other applications that we can use and implement, and these tools? Is there like a central place that we can go? Okay, hey, here, these are all the
So
AI.
use GenAI to find out about GenAI, right? So for example, if you use Google,
Hmm.
uh, Gemini is the Google AI kind of capability.
Okay.
You can ask it questions. I mean,
Mhm.
everything that we've talked about here, right? I'm not pushing ChatGPT, but you can go into ChatGPT, download the app, and you
Mhm.
can kind of ask it questions, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You can, everything that we've talked about here. That's what I would do. I would use that. And again, encouraging your listeners, go use this instead of doing a typical Google search.
Mm.
Go ask ChatGPT the same question, and now ChatGPT is also very sophisticated in voice. So you can just simply say, "Hey ChatGPT, I've been thinking about this topic on privacy and AI. What do you think?"
Mhm.
It'll give you an answer. "Well, I'm not sure. Is this really true? What about Europe?" It'll give you an answer.
Yeah.
Really, do you really believe that? Yes, I believe that. So you can have this whole kind of almost
Yeah.
conversation with your AI buddy instead of it being like this text-based thing.
That may be the future. Your best friend may be your AI buddy,
Yeah, just
Not,
sit at home,
not
never talk to anybody. It could be horrible.
exactly. Wow, Zia, this was really, really good. And I think you gave us such a fantastic introduction to Gen AI. And I'm excited to see what's up your sleeve for the next several years. I know you're not far behind the cutting edge bit of technology and all that.
It's a good time. But thank you. This was awesome, and congratulations on all the success with the radio station. It's so fantastic. This was a dream for me to come and engage with you on this. So thank you.
Thank you, Zia. Take care.
All right.
Bye.